Hey y'all, it's your girl Jada, Rayne, and welcome back to season 2, episode 2 of No Brew Shit. And today I have a couple of lovely guests that are going to be discussing this topic with me. Go ahead and grab your cups and we'll go ahead and get this conversation started.
Tobalase Apata.
I'm Evelyn Sanchez.
Kind of just to first get into it, one of my first questions that I have for you guys is, you know, as a child, you're presented with a lot of different images about what a family looks like. When you were, little, small kid, what was your idea of the perfect family? What was presented to you as the perfect family?
That nuclear family where it would be mom, dad together. There'll always be an older sister or an older brother, and then a younger sister or younger brother was always one or the other. And of course, in a suburban neighborhood, everything is all happy and swell.
Mm-hmm. Me, I had two images of family. I had the one that they pushed on media. So like, the white picket fence. Just, that version of perfect connections and perfect everything, on media. And then I had the image of family that my family portrayed from, which was there are no like lines in family. So it wasn't my immediate family that I only qualified as family. It was cousins. It was people that didn't even have blood, but they were so involved in my life. They were family. So family for like my parents and what they taught me was just that it's anybody who shows you love and will always continue to show you love.
Which is beautiful that you even had like both of those images and both of those representations, because I know for a lot of kids, they can't, decipher the difference because you're shown that. And so then when you see stuff like that on TV, you're thinking, well, why doesn't my family look like that? So we're talking about commercial, film, TV. What was that first depiction that you saw of a family? For me, I feel like it was the Cosby Show. I remember going to my grandparents' house. They turn on the TV and just watching the Cosby Show was like that first depiction of family that I always go back to. And even watching that, there were some elements of perfection, I guess you could say. But yeah, that was probably my first TV representation.
Mine would probably be the same. My parents loved the Jeffersons.
Yeah.
So we saw a lot of that too.
My first depiction of like a family, it would definitely be the Wizards of Waverly Places when I first saw a Latinx household, and I was like, oh, this is what it should, like a Latinx household should be, because that's a media that I consumed at a young age. I was definitely a Disney kid, and although it was like magic and everything, I would see a lot that I could relate to, but also, again, just saying, reflecting, like, oh, they're like this. Why is my family like this? I would always question. Also coming to the realization, like, this is just a show. Like, it's not true.
You said there were some differences. Do you want to kind of expand on what differences you saw?
Yeah. I mean, it would always just be how like Alex Russo, of course, that would be who I would connect to the most because she was a female Latina. And so I would always, when she would have her father like make dad jokes, I would be like, has my dad made dad jokes? Like I would always question, like, what has he done that's relatable to her dad? And just, again, comparing my family to theirs, like their mother, how outgoing she is. I'm like, yeah, that's like my mom, I can see that in her.
I think for me, especially with the Cosbys, seeing like a mom and dad in the same household with this great relationship is something that I craved as a child. Like my parents didn't live together, they were divorced. So seeing that on TV, I wanted that to play out in my own real life. If you do see like a single parent home or a home with one person in there, that's like the figurehead. I feel like a lot of times it's depicted as negative.
Between when I was 9 and then again, my senior year of high school, I would always cry whenever I would see, two parents in a household, because I do come from parents of divorce. Mm-hmm. So just seeing that, I would always be like, wow, like I wish I had that, because I saw how I was learning around that time, how it was affecting me. Mm-hmm. And I think it took a long time for me to process. But while seeing media, I was like, again, comparing like how their families to mine.
With Wizards of Waverly Place, one thing I pulled from it was their familial secrecy. Mm-hmm. Like all knew something about each other, but nobody else knew anything about it. And anyone else you guys are going to tell, you run it by me before, you know what I mean? Like, mm-hmm. And I think secrecy plays a huge role in family, kind of like, just certain things that only your immediate family members know about you.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Like, I can't tell you how many times within my own family I've heard, like, what stays in this family stays between us. Like, anytime you go out talking about your family business outside, the family fold, it's kind of seen as a negative thing. Even when it comes to, like, and we'll get into this later too, but even when it comes to, like, mental health, I think that sometimes it's even stigmatized in the family space where we don't talk about the things that we go through. Now that we've kind of talked a little bit about, media depiction, I think that's going to come up in our conversation still. I want to kind of start at the root. I want to start at childhood. Kind of just to start, how would you guys describe your childhood?
I am the youngest of 4. I have 3 older siblings. Each have substantial age gaps between all of us. As the youngest, I always felt like I was pampered and that my family like carried me on this throne, like they all just, those like depictions of the princess being carried on a pillow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's how I felt. But then I like stage where I realized I feel isolated, kind of like this. I feel detached from my family a little bit because my mom had my sister and I 10 years apart.
Mm-hmm.
So there was literally a whole life before me that I had no idea about. And there was a lot of years in between that gap. So there's a life about my family I'll never know about.
Mm-hmm.
And so the older I got, the more I'm like, okay, I don't want to really be like carried like this anymore. I want to be like with you guys. I want to be immersed in you guys. You know what I mean? So just that contrast of feeling definitely protected, but then also feeling excluded. And each of my siblings worked hard to protect me from information as best as they could. So a lot of the times I felt excluded, or even from experiences, it's simply because I wasn't old enough. I'm sure anybody who is the youngest or the oldest knows that some things you just have to sit out because you're not old enough. That's the reason, that there is for that. So
yeah. Well, I think when you have that big age gap between siblings, it does get hard for you guys to kind of relate a little bit. You know what I mean? I can only imagine for you. And even though I only have like one brother and we're 3 years apart, and that's not a huge significant age gap, but there are some differences there. So I can definitely see where you're coming from.
How my family was structured was my family was together until I was 9, and that's when my parents divorced.
Mm-hmm.
And because of family issues, just what was going on back home, my dad decided to go back to Mexico. I understand now. Like, I never resented him for that decision because that's what I liked about. That's why me and my father had a closer relationship to me and my mom. Was my dad understood that, I have emotions, and he was the more emotional one actually compared to my mom. So I never resented him for it because he always sat me down before any hard decision. Like before him and my mom divorced, he sat me down and wanted me to make sure I understood why. When he left, he sat me down and wanted me to understand why. So after my dad left, my sister took more of a parental role because my mom, being a single mother, she had to take on more jobs to help provide for the family. So being the youngest again, I felt very pampered. I felt like I was able to actually have a childhood compared to my sister, who she had to abandon hers so she can take care of me. And I think I depended more her as a motherly figure than on my own mother.
Sometimes I think that happens a lot. My parents divorced when I was 3. So they weren't together long enough for me, I guess, to like notice it enough. And so my dad was still in my life, but I only saw him every other weekend. How that affected my relationship with my brother, I think because my mom was gone a lot, work and just out of the house a lot. For me, I felt like I started to act more like a matriarch to my brother than a sister. And I think that kind of affected our relationship moving forward. And so, I think sometimes that role kind of took over a little bit. You feel that pressure as the oldest one. So I definitely feel a contrast to what you guys feel being the youngest. I feel like being the oldest, there was a lot more pressure. There's a lot more pressure to make sure the house was straight a certain way. There was a lot more pressure to make sure I'm doing this, this, and that, because that not only falls on me, but that falls on my brother. So I think when you're the oldest in the household, you feel like a parent. You feel like a replacement parent at times.
And I say it all the time with like my older siblings. The older I get, the more I realize that saying they walk so I could run is true.
Yeah.
And so just certain things that I developed early isn't because I was better than them or because, whatever. It was simply because they paved the path for me to dodge certain things so that I could discover myself earlier. I could discover this talent earlier. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think being like, when you're the first child, I don't want to say you're the guinea pig because that sounds mean, but in the reality, you kind of are because you're learning. You're the first one, so your parent is just learning how to be a parent because there's no rule book or no right way to be a parent, right? So I think my parents were definitely learning with me first. And then, they get softer when the younger ones come around because it's like, well, we've already been through this. Now we know our way around it. So they don't be holding on so tight. The older I get, I have an appreciation and understanding. Like, things were a little harder for me because they were just figuring it out. But when you're a kid in that role, you feel a bit of like, and I don't know, maybe your guys' older siblings feel this way too. You feel favoritism. I always felt like I was not the favorite.
I felt like my oldest sister, she was the favorite in a way because she was a part of their story immigrating here. Like she saw the most. So just that on its own, she had an automatic connection to my parents that none of us would really understand.
How did you start to kind of immerse yourself in the culture and kind of build that connection with them?
My parents always made it their priority to teach us the culture. So like they spoke Yoruba to us at home. They taught us the culture dances. Like they just would teach us what they could. And even though my oldest sister, she was 1 when they moved from Nigeria, it's just that like my mom told me the story of her immigration day here. And she just remembers that she was on a plane with her daughter, like just those two, you know what I mean? Whatever else you forget about that day, she knows she had her child in her hands coming to a country where she knew nobody but her husband. So that on its own, I'm sure this is a special connection we have here. You know what I mean?
Right. How did that make you feel? Because you're telling me how you feel about it, like as an adult. How did it make you feel as a kid?
I didn't wrap my head around it as a kid. I never even gave it thought.
Yeah, just something you kind of reflected on.
Yeah, it's actually a new reflection because I've actually just been now asking my parents more about their immigration story here.
I think that's really interesting. What about for you, Evelyn?
I remember my sister would always say that I was the favorite, and I would see it affecting her because again, like it affects you as the oldest when you see me, the youngest, barely doing anything and being seen as the favorite because because I mean, I'm not gonna lie, like I was the one who had, the better grades. I had the better extracurriculars, but that's just because I had the freedom to, while she didn't. She had to, again, raise me. And when we were younger, around like her teens and my like preteens, again, we would be each other's rock. So I would always tell her like, it's okay. Like, no one hates you for like not having the best grades. I understand. And I would always tell her like, thank you. Cause I knew my parents wouldn't tell her. So I would be the one to tell her just to show her how grateful I am. And then I didn't even hear about my immigrant story with my family until a couple months ago, where my sister actually told me that it was just me and her that actually crossed the border rather than with our parents. Cause my dad was the first one already here. And then my mom couldn't afford to take all three of us. So she wanted me and my sister to go first and then her. So that's when I started realizing like, oh, she's been taking care of me way before the divorce. Like she helped me actually come to this country with her help. And she was telling me, because we did get captured by the center, and she was just telling me how like she was scared. And then I just hugged her because I was like, I'm so grateful. Like, imagine being that on like the oldest, like she doesn't know what to do, and that's so much pressure on her. So just learning that, I grew an even bigger appreciation that I had for her.
Oh yeah, for sure. Do you feel like because she had to be kind of like motherly role at that point in your guys' life, does she have kids now?
She doesn't have kids.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so she only has dogs, and I think it definitely has affected her. Like she's told me like, why do I want to have another kid when I already raised you? And like I understand that because I was like, you were changing my diapers damn near.
For sure, because that was her first learning curve. That's crazy. And I bet you so many like older siblings probably feel that way.
Yeah, so I have two older sisters. Both of them have 2 kids. And when I spoke to them, they say that raising me in a way just prepared them for their kids. Like they knew what to expect. Because like you said, your sister was changing your diapers.
Mhm.
My sisters were 8 and 10 when I was born. So they were definitely heavily involved in how I grew up. Now, one thing I definitely will say where it's tricky with older sisters and that age gap is, like you said, they feel like they're your mom.
Mm-hmm.
And the older you get, you don't want a relationship with 3 moms. You just want the one with your real mom. And then you want your siblings, you want your sisters. So making that transition from, okay, yeah, you raised me, thank you so much, I appreciate you. Can we slowly try to transition to me being your little sister now? You know what I mean?
But how? So I wonder for both of you guys, how do you make that transition? What steps have you made to make that transition, or have they made to make that possible?
Definitely for me, it was both of us speaking up. So when I was seeing a pattern like, okay, this feels very putting me back in my child box, I spoke up about it. And even with my sister, she spoke, especially when she had a family of her own, or both of them. They just, you can't access them as much because they have to, preserve themselves for their family.
Mm-hmm.
So just inserting boundaries and speaking up when something feels like it shouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for me and my sister, I think it was until my freshman year of high school where we started like breaking down and like actually having conversation about how she would feel about around that time. I started asking her like, how do you feel about these things? That's around my quinceañera, and like in a Latinx household, that's when you're seen as a grown up, she's blossoming. And again, that got in my head, like I need to start being more of an adult kind of, and having those conversations with my sister. So again, just talking about everything that happened and unpacking it, and also letting her enjoy her years. Whenever like I got into an age where I was able to drink alcohol, I think that's where we were starting to get more sisterly, like, oh, you don't have to worry about taking care of me. And I would tell her like, oh, I'll take care of you. Like if you get really fucked up, I got you. And she was like, that's so like, it's so weird because she's so used to taking care of me.
That's how I feel with my brother. Like, man, I went home this last Christmas and had a full-blown beard. I was like, I cannot keep treating you like a child. You're a grown man now. But it's so hard to unlearn that. And I guess for me, the way I'm kind of transitioning into that is one, giving space. And I think it helped that I moved away. I moved out for college and I've been gone. So I guess the way we're transitioning is just restarting over, having new conversations, finding what we bond at as adults. Like you were saying, like, he can't drink yet. He ain't supposed to be drinking yet. But, finding things that we still have in common as adults and not as kids, because I think it was just a different dynamic for sure. In our life, when it comes to the way that we were brought up and our upbringing, what parts of our family are, whether mom, dad, whoever, what parts of their upbringing, their childhood has influenced the way that they have parented you?
Right.
So my mom was a pastor's kid.
Okay.
So she was, raised in a very holy setting, and she continued that holy, mindset as she should, for sure. But it was just very different being raised by such a traditional mom. And I explored, especially when I came to college, I explored contemporary, other like non-traditional things, and that's where we kind of had a little clash, because it's like she's just this different woman. Her upbringing was different, whereas me, I wanted to explore more. And then my father, it was actually interesting. So I went to Nigeria and I finally had a conversation with my grandfather. There's a language barrier there because I can't speak Yoruba as fluently as I would like to like hold a conversation, but this time I just tried it. And being able to connect with my grandfather on a deeper level and understand how he thought, I understood my dad so much more because I saw who raised him, and I saw like, okay, this is where you get this, or just seeing, because like you, I think you were saying, Evelyn, that your dad's side's not as much, they're not here as much as your mom's. That's how it was with us. Like I know my mom's side to a T, but my dad's side, I'm still getting to know them. So I didn't have anyone to base his behavior off of.
Right.
And but just hearing like my grandfather just talk about like how they tried to conserve a lot. They didn't grow up with a lot of money and with a lot of a lot of anything. So like just hearing, I'm like, okay, this makes sense. This is why my dad does this. Or for example, my grandfather he worked at a laundromat.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way my dad irons pants is because he used to follow my grandpa to work. And I didn't realize that he's so tedious and meticulous about how he irons his pants, because this is something that was literally like a part of his childhood. You know what I mean?
At my grandpa's funerals, where I learned a lot about my mom's childhood, because I mean, it wasn't until the funeral where I learned that my mom actually didn't have a mother figure. It was just my grandpa. So again, I was starting to see how that it was affecting her. Like, she didn't have anyone. And again, with like the toxic masculinity and the Latinx culture, I was starting to see how that affected her, with not having a motherly figure, not having someone to be emotionally vulnerable to, because she always, again, the pride, always had to seem like she had it together and she was strong. And I was starting to see that around when I was coming back home from college, how I'm like, wow, like my mom is actually has a lot of emotions, and I can see that she's fighting them, because again, in her childhood, she's grown up that if she shows emotion, she's weak. With that pride, she doesn't really open up. There's been times where me and my sister would try to open up with my mom, but she would just be like, no, like, I don't want to talk about it. Because again, in the community, you just don't want to talk about your problems because you don't want to seem weak.
Right.
That was something I recently learned about my mother. My dad, back when my grandma was alive, again, my dad came from a single mother as well. So my dad only had my mother and him. I'm not really sure of his siblings. He never really mentioned that to me or anything about his childhood. He just always mentioned like, oh, I didn't have a dad, and like that's why I'm trying my best to be there for you, because I don't want to do what he did and just leave me. I also see how my mom only having her dad and my dad only having his mom, their vulnerability. My dad was more comfortable with being emotional and being vulnerable. And I think that's also why I had a better connection with my dad while growing up, while he was in the United States, was because I was able to open up to him better rather than with my mom. Like, I would only see my mother as someone hardworking, and that's all I would take from her, because again, proving again to her whole family that she's worth what she is.
So with my dad, I would say we're close because yes, he serves as emotional support for me as well. And I think sometimes he's a lot more level-headed than I am when it comes to how I express my emotions. I do feel like the reason he's been so active in my life is because with his background of not having his, biological dad in his life, he always made it his mission to be in mine. And so I think that has I think that's why we have the type of relationship that's very open. We talk about a lot of things, even though, that's my dad. I come to him with almost everything. I think with my mom, we used to butt heads a lot. We're both emotional individuals, so we were butting heads a lot. I didn't realize until I got older some of the emotional trauma that she had went through as a young adult and as a young person, how that impacted the way that she raised me. It was so easy for me at a point in time in my life I think at a point I was resentful because I felt like our relationship wasn't where I wanted it to be. When you think of the role of a mom, there's a particular idea that you have, right? Or any parent. And because it wasn't fitting the role that I expected, I think sometimes I had some resentment. And I think it wasn't until I got older that I realized the reason that things were the way that they were because my mom was still discovering herself. Mm-hmm. And that was something I couldn't wrap my head around, right? Because I'm thinking, well, you're older than me. You should know yourself by now. You should be doing this, X, Y, and Z. And I didn't realize my mom was recovering from her own hurt and trauma. My mom was trying to figure out who she was. And I think because now she's done that work, it has improved our relationship vastly and vice versa. So I guess what I'm getting at is it's hard to think of our parents before they were our parents. Mm-hmm. It's hard to think of them as, I don't want to say people, but I think we do that sometimes. We think of our parents as like extraordinary beings of perfection that they're supposed to be instead of like they're human. Mm-hmm. Like they've had a whole set of experiences, like you guys had just mentioned, that they had before we even got on this earth.
Right.
That makes them the way that they are. So it's like, why do we not interact with them the way we accept and interact with other people? Like friends, for example. We talked about this before the show. We forgive friends when it comes to shortcomings. Why sometimes within our family dynamics, we don't do the same? Does it hurt different? I kind of want to know what you guys think about that.
I have two things to say, because we don't do that with our parents and we don't do that with ourselves.
Yeah.
We're really hard on ourselves and we're an extension of our parents in a way. And I think we just put so much, especially at this, well, I don't know, let me not like group you guys in, but my personal experiences, like from 19 to like 21, basically, I'm just in this stage of, wow, parents, I do certain things because you handed this off to me, kind of. You know what I mean? I have certain traits because you handed this off to me. So I have to keep reminding myself, your parents parented you from their level of perception.
Mm.
Right.
That's all they could do. And like one of my biggest issues with my parents is that I'm this American girl raised in an African household.
Mm.
So I'm expecting my parents to parent me like how, and a lot of the time things I was seeing was on TV, like, you know, white household. Yeah, we had the TV show we talked about before that had like other ethnicities in it. But for the most part, we were watching white families on TV.
Mm.
So now that I'm older, I'm realizing no wonder there was a disconnect. Our like different cultures have different love languages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so when I was able to make that connection, like, okay, yeah, your parents didn't do X, Y, and Z, but they also did a lot of A, B, and C. You know what I mean? With my mom, because I'm always called her twin. Like, I look just like my mother. It's scary.
Mm.
And going back to what I said before, how our personalities are so different. So I always wanted to connect to my mom because I'm like, Mom, we're twins. You know what I mean? Like, but then there was just that like disconnect because our interests started to be like, once I started to grow and into when I came to college and found like I started to find who I really was, I was like, oh, my mom and I are actually kind of like, you know, not like we're just not the same people. But I realized we have a lot of things we are similar in. That goes back to like not focusing on the bad, but what do you have in common? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't have this in common, but you have this in common, you know?
Where criticism was her way of like that would be the way that was harming her, because again, having to prove herself over and over again just because she's a woman doesn't mean she's worth any less. Like every time I would like go back on my childhood, that was something my mom did, like criticism. And although at the time I didn't understand where she was coming from, because I mean, I'm not gonna lie, getting criticized by your own parent hurts because you want to prove them constantly. And again, reflecting, I was like, I never got good grades because I wanted it. It's because I wanted to prove to my mom that I was the daughter that she wanted. And like, again, it took me a long time to, at the end of the day, realize like my mom was going to be proud of me no matter what. She was just doing that because that's how she was raised. See her like slowly but surely getting more emotionally available and unlearning or recovering from her childhood trauma.
I love that you brought that point up because I feel like I went through the same kind of criticism with my mom, whereas I felt like hers was kind of rooted in the insecurity that she had, that she carried. And I feel like in some ways that insecurity got passed on to me. So it's interesting now, it's like now we have the kind of relationship where we're constantly bigging each other up all the time. And I feel like this with both of my parents. Sometimes you feel like a parent to your parent. Yeah. Isn't it crazy how the roles reverse as you get older, how they lean on you for support? Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's just an interesting dynamic change. And I don't know if you guys see that kind of play out in your own personal lives.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's more so in the emotional department, like as we've been saying, because they didn't have time to sort through that. Yeah. So here I am just analyzing my parents. And I'm like, so when I go home a lot during breaks, I'm like, okay, so we need to fix this, and this. And I realized that's not working because honestly, imagine if someone was coming home and telling you, okay, this is where you went wrong and I need you to fix it. That's not how it works.
Yeah,
right. That's not how it works. And then but then it was also a venting process for me too, because I was saying like, I need you to fix this because of me. Once I took the selfishness out of it and just realized I need to give these people their time to, you know, for them to get there and for them to fix it, then it'll be more effective.
You're like, remember, my mom had us at 21. That's like when she's starting to drink. And like, look at what we're doing at 21 and look at what she was doing. So I would tell my sister, like, let her live it up. And I think that's what I'm doing now with my mom is, although I'm trying to not be her daughter as much, but also be her friend, because my mom doesn't have that emotional support ever since my parents got the divorce. And again, my mom's been dating, but she's never had that solid support group. She's only had my aunts. but I understand that my mom also needs her own personal friends. So I try to have that line between a daughter and also being her friend, because like you mentioned, we need to start being like how we are with our friends, with our parents.
I struggle with, how do I straddle that fence of acceptance, but also accountability? So holding my parents' feet to the fire about things that hurt me in the past, and the way that one, how it's deeply hurt me, but also how it's impacted me as an adult. I feel like those conversations are so hard to have, especially now, because okay, you've accepted that you've done these things because of, X, Y, and Z, or you raised me this way because of X, Y, and Z, but how do you hold them accountable for that hurt?
So that's actually, I'm literally going through that right now, because I don't want them to feel like I'm just mad at their parenting towards me. And that generation, they don't really hear it as this is constructive criticism. They just hear that they're being attacked. And then it turns into being ungrateful. And that's not at all what it is. Again, I realize my delivery with my parents it's all in the delivery. If you're saying it from a way that they're not going to accept it, that's a futile conversation. Also, timing. If our parents are stressed out or like mad already irritable, that's not a time to bring up childhood trauma. You know what I mean? Like, bring it up when they're going to be ready to receive it emotionally. And also my sister just told me this concept of pivoting. So that basically comes up where, when you're, like you said, our parents are for the most part set in stone. They're older. Not saying they're not capable of change, but they are who they are right now. And so when you're going towards something that is set in stone in a way, or with little movement, all you can change is, okay, how can I pivot around the situation to have a favorable response?
Yeah, I think the way I brought up what my mom could have done better was when I started therapy, which was like my sophomore year, that's when I was personally learning my own childhood trauma, because I never, I would never think before. I never thought like, oh, this happening in my childhood is affecting me now. I thought I already processed and got better from it, but it's still affecting me. And it was when I first told my mom about, like, I told her, I was like, hey mom, like, I'm having therapy. And my mom, first thing she said was, what am I doing wrong? I'm just like, you're not doing anything wrong. Like, everyone has therapy. It's okay. I told her, and like, it was when I was first starting. So we haven't gotten to the point of childhood trauma. We were just talking about the recent trauma that I experienced. And yeah, again, like, she thought that she was at fault. She thought that she was the reason why I was in therapy, asking me again, like, what did she do wrong? Like, what could she do better? And I told her, like, let me take my time with therapy, and whatever she tells me about my childhood, I'll tell you. And it got to a point where she only thought the only childhood trauma I had was a divorce. And I was like, no, mom, like, there's a lot more things that I didn't think would affect me as much as that divorce did. And so once I brought up the fact that I was going therapy, I think that's when my mom also started accepting mental health, because one thing that she would always say during childhood was, hey, don't cry. Because again, the pride, don't show that you're weak, don't show emotion. And I'm, again, seeing how that affected me. And I told my mom, I was like, hey mom, you always say don't cry, but it's actually hurting me and my sister. And that was when she like got the realization, like, oh, mental health is a thing. I'm like, yeah, mom, like, it's a real thing. And I think also with having an authority, having like more, I wouldn't say authority, but having like a higher position, telling her like, oh, my therapist did this, my therapist did that. I think that's what got, like, oh, it's not just my daughter. It's like someone else looking outside of our family.
For me, I wish that it would have been more of a gentler approach when I had that first conversation with my mom. I think the first time we had that conversation, it was before I went to college, right? And it just came out like word vomit. It just came out. And even though it wasn't the most graceful of an approach, I think we just had gotten to that point where I just felt like I couldn't hold it in anymore. Especially because there's that element of, like you said, I didn't want to hurt her deep down, or anybody in my family that, has hurt me. I never want to hurt anybody by what I have to say, even if, it's pertaining to my feelings. And so that wasn't the best way to bring it about, but it had the conversation going. And honestly, with her having gone through therapy, me having gone through my own therapy, it has made those conversations, they're not easy, and we're still going through it, but it's made it a lot easier for us to just sit down with each other and be like, look, this is where I've been hurt. This is why. And I mean, like I said, I can't say enough. I think it's changed our relationship for the better, but it definitely, that transition took a long time. And so that's what I would say is like, give it time. Honestly, it's time. I mean, you got to think that's years of trauma. That's years of, miscommunications and things happening. That doesn't just work itself out overnight.
Because like sometimes I want a verbal apology, but then I'm realizing again, going back, we're trying to differentiate white standards or white love languages. This is literally a love language of my mother. It's food. So she's telling me sorry, just not verbally. You know what I mean?
I said sometimes that's hard to accept though, because I know like for me, I feel like it's a step, but I always felt like there's got to be more from here.
Yeah.
Because I felt like then things would fester and kind of build up. Now, I do agree with you. It definitely is a love language, but I feel like so often, I think sometimes parents don't feel like they do owe their kids a genuine verbal apology because you're my child, I made you, so
that's true.
That's enough. So yeah, I think sometimes I can't count how many times, even with my dad, it's like we'll just kind of like he'll kind of give me a hug and that's there is no like, messed up.
I kind of want guys. So what do you define an apology? What do you consider an apology?
For me, it's acknowledgement.
Yeah, definitely.
That something you did is wrong. Sometimes I feel like the nonverbal apology from a parent is not you acknowledging that you did wrong, it's you avoiding.
Yeah.
I need to hear you say it.
That's true. Right. That is true.
I think that's where I'm at with this. I need to hear you say, I could have did that differently. I could have said that differently. But then there's such a power dynamic parent-child, because that would mean for them to view you as equal. And I think that's really hard for a parent to view you as their equal. But I feel like the older you get, they kind of have to, because now you're an adult now. You're not a child anymore.
You're absolutely right. And like you said, with the nonverbal apologies, it's harder for that conversation to happen subsequently because we never talked about it.
Yeah.
And when I think of an apology, I think of it as, like you said, acknowledging. So you just acknowledging, I'm not happy with you. And most of the time, our parents know why. Not saying that they read our minds, but they know, you know what I mean? They know what they did. And so after I have an interaction with or a nonverbal apology, I'll look to see if they continue those behaviors. Because I've also had interactions with my parents where they'll say sorry, but keep doing it. So I know it's really in those situations, not even just with our parents, that's with anybody. You can keep an apology if you're not going to change what I'm mad about. You know what
I want to touch on something you said, because I love when you came back to the love languages. And I want to ask you, is your love language different than your parents?
Yeah.
For both of you guys. Because Tom, I really loved how you talk about like food as a love language within your family. It's like a common strand. Is there any love languages where you differ?
I talk about this all the time with my friends, because me and my friends always talk about our love languages, and they brought up that question where like, how's your love language different from your parents? And I've seen my mom's love language is touch, and I saw how that actually negatively affected me, because before being in a healthy relationship, I never liked anyone touching me, even my own mother. Like when she would like touch my shoulder, I'm like, oh, like, ew, like, why are you touching me? Like I was so uncomfortable with it. And I never saw it like negatively affect my mom, because I think that was another way of her apologizing, was like trying to like touch my shoulder, letting her know like I'm here for you, even though we just got like into an argument. But again, I was so heated in the moment that I was like, don't touch me, like I don't want to be touched. And mine is quality time. So whenever, and I see that again, like my mom, she's super busy and I never got that quality time with her. So I see that reflected now. Like I see why it's my love language, because I want to get what I never got as a child. I got that with my sister, but I never got that from like my parent, both my mother and my father, because again, they were so busy with their jobs and providing for us that I never got to spend time with them. That's why now, with everything slowing down, also because of the pandemic, I'm learning so much about them.
My parents, I think their love language is acts of service. So just us doing things for them. Like they used to love it. My brother and I used to cook for them when we were like teenagers. They used to love that.
Y'all could throw down. Listen,
Thank
you. But go ahead.
Thank you. So yeah, just doing little things for them, or just um, showing them like, hey, parents, I'm here, at your service. Well, and then they're again in the transition as their kids are becoming adults. It's kind of hard to draw that boundary line because we are less available for them physically. You know what I mean? Because we're growing up, moving away. But definitely when I go back home, I try to do a lot for my parents because I see that they love that. But mine was quality time. Just spending time with my family. So I used to love it when we would go on vacations together, when we would travel together, even if that's just to like visit our cousins who live in a different state, or just, actual family vacations. That's actually something I really appreciate about my parents. They took us with them everywhere. So we experienced a lot of wow moments together.
So definitely, I think traveling can be a glue as well. I think my love language is, and I didn't realize this until I got older, was words of affirmation is a big one for me. And it's crazy because my mom's gifts and acts of service. And I think, with my dad, I think it's either physical touch or words of affirmation also. So it's just kind of interesting how sometimes you find yourself having to kind of not give in, but be a little more receptive to doing things within that love language, because you just automatically assume, well, because we're related, it's got to be the same. And it's not. I kind of round out our discussion. There are two like big questions I really want to ask you guys. So the first one being, we've talked a lot about how we've been brought up, our upbringing. How do you think that's going to impact the type of parent that you're going to be? Or if you don't want, you may be somebody that just want to be the rich auntie. So, you always, you're going to be an aunt. So, how do you feel like that's going to impact everything that you've been through, good, bad, whatever that might mean, or your family structure? How's that going to impact how you are?
I definitely think there's a reason why you're a child before you're a parent. Like that order is on purpose. So it's really take what you like that your parents did and leave what you didn't. And because I have two sisters who are parents, so I'm watching them and I'm watching my parents. So I'm just pulling from all of their, parenting skills and stuff. And I'm really just seeing each child that God gives us is a different package. So it's really hard to say I'm going to parent this way, because when you have a kid, you may realize that's not going to work. Because how we were just talking about love languages, it's the parent's responsibility to see what is my child's love language. And from there, that's how you can go about parenting.
I want to always keep the dialogue open. I don't never want my child to feel like they can't come to me about anything. It's crazy. Like I was in high school and we made these handmade journals, right? I made it. I wish I could pull it out. I don't know where I put it, but it's a handmade journal, made the binding, everything. And I told myself, because I was always the type of person, I said, I don't want to have a daughter, because I was so afraid of what that relationship would be like, because it was hard for me to navigate that with my own mom. And I made the journal because I told myself if she couldn't tell me face to face, she could write it in this journal, whatever she felt, and I would respond to her in it. And so I don't know, I guess that's just how I want to be as a parent, because as you already said, you don't know, how your child's going to be and how you can really anticipate those needs when they ain't even here yet. If anything, I hope I'm the type of mother where you don't ever feel like you got to go somewhere else. You always know you can come to me. And even if I'm not doing something right and I ain't ready to hear it, I need to hear it.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of parent I want to be.
Absolutely.
I'm at a part of my life where I don't see myself having kids because I'm just so busy. And thinking back on like how my mom was, how she was always busy, and like thinking how that's impacted me. I guess it's more of I don't want kids because I fear that I'm going to be like my mom, where I'm not going to be there when they need me, because I'm not going to know, because again, I'm so busy with work. And I think that's, again, a big fear of mine, that I'm not going to be able to be there fully. So I'm like, I rather right now I'm thinking it's like I want to just be there for myself first, and then if I do eventually have a kid, I know for sure communication is like a big thing. I want my kids, like you mentioned, like I want them to feel comfortable with talking to me and my significant other about what's going on in their life. Like it doesn't have to be like them telling me about their sex life, but like I want to know like what's going on, like what's the tea? Tell me what you and your friends are fighting about. Like I want them to see me like as someone they can come to, not someone they're fearful.
I applaud you though for being able to be honest enough to say, hey, I got to work on myself, because even with my own mom, I think she should have did that first. And with many other people's parents, my dad included, like so many other people sometimes, and you know, you can't help what happens. Life happens sometimes.
Right.
Pregnant, but I feel like it's very mature of you to say that, like, I need to work on myself first before I even think about bringing and trying to cultivate another life. And that kind of brings me to our last question, ladies. What is the overall importance of family to you?
When I think of my family, I think of a dream team. Everybody has their own role. If you really sit back and like look at it, like, oh, like literally there can't be a missing link because everybody contributed to how our family was developed. When I think of a dream team or even basketball, the analogy towards basketball, when someone gets tired, you sub them out. You let people rest. And that's why it's so important that everybody on the team is equipped. Everybody on the team is skilled so that when somebody is sitting on the bench, the family's still moving. I think the whole purpose of family is, because you have two. You have the one you're born into and the one you create. And I think both of them are just vessels for you to get to fulfilling your.
I mean, I would like to also think of the team aspect and also as your first introduction into kind of how the world is, because you're dealing with others' emotions. So, you know, although we're little, we're learning about how, like, oh, if someone cries, this is what we do. If someone's angry, this is what we do. And like, we're just learning about how to deal with others, how to have empathy for other people in our lives. So definitely a big learning environment, but also the foundation of what you need, because you need that, like, that's your first support system.
I look at the importance of family as being a teacher in terms of learning to love unconditionally, learning to love someone flaws and all, despite anything that they may do, what they may go through. And unconditional love doesn't necessarily mean accepting them mistreating you, but just learning to love people for who they are and as they are. And I think for me, that's been, the ultimate teacher of why family is so important.
So thank you guys for hanging out with me and joining the conversation. Tune in next week for the next episode. Bye.